What I want to do today is I want to do the first lesson on the basic philosophy behind astrology. What really is astrology? Why does it work? Because there's a lot of misunderstandings about astrology, misinterpretations, even within the astrological community. So if we want to look at, first of all, do you have any beliefs or concepts about what makes astrology work?
Like for the most part, I understand it to be a little bit to do with the planetary piece and a little bit to do with there's a soul piece behind it too, right?
Yes, that's right.
What are some of the misconceptions that you hear before we get into that? Is there?
Well, there's misconceptions that the stars control us. And then there's a lot of people who reject astrology because they believe or they think that that's what astrology is all about, and that we are pigeonholed and categorized, and that, you know, when you look at the sun sign astrology, was actually, it started out, the sun sign predictions you see in newspaper columns, that started out more than 100 years ago when astrologers were really in a ghetto and nobody knew anything about them. So the astrologers thought, we've got to find some way to interface with the general public. So we have to find something that's easy for people to figure out and look up and know about already, so that they can start to get interested in this and engage with the idea. So because originally the rising sign, which changes every 2 hours, you have to know your time of birth, was considered to be your sign. Everybody, if someone asks you, what is your sign? You would tell them what your rising sign is, not what your sun sign is. So that was the focal point of the entire system of astrology. And people, the sun is very important also. So astrologers said, well, everybody can easily figure out where their sun is. It's in the same place every year. We can launch these sort of not very serious predictions that aren't really that real, but at least it will gain the attention, and then they'll come and see a real astrologer. So that was a good idea. The unfortunate thing is that now it has become something that turns people away from astrology, because it's very obvious that that's not very real. It seems fake. And then when we get all the astrologers that are thinking of, what am I going to put in my newsletter to promote my website? Mercury retrograde is really easy because it happens 4 times a year. So you've got an easy subject matter for 4 of your newsletters every year, which is Mercury retrograde. So now the whole world knows about Mercury retrograde. Now the whole world doesn't want to go outside when Mercury is retrograde, because things are going to fall on their head. Everything's going to go wrong. And it's this whole idea that we're victimized to the planets, which is completely backwards.
That we don't have free will, or is it?
Well, actually beyond that we're not the creators of our own experience. That there's something else outside of us that's creating our experience. So if you look at quantum physics has proven, even on a scientific level, that it is our attention, is what we focus on, what we concentrate on, changes reality around us, even on a physical atomic level or subatomic level. Attention creates form. So if you look at quantum physics, when something is coming into form, it takes the form of a wave pattern, which means there's all these different possibilities that haven't manifested. Concentration or focus or attention causes the wave pattern to choose one of those alternatives and to manifest in a specific direction.
Okay, so the more that we focus on it, the more that it becomes true.
Well, what happens is everything has even a myriad of possible outcomes. And even African spirituality would talk about that when they talk about a fan-shaped destiny. So if you imagine you're sitting in one place and you've got many different possible paths out in front of you at all times, that's your fan-shaped destiny. So which piece of that fan we're focused on, either consciously or subconsciously, determines where our destiny is going to go along which path of that fan-shaped destiny. So that's the old, that's a traditional, one traditional piece of African spiritual philosophy. You see it everywhere, this deeper understanding that the consciousness and our point of focus or attention is that point of power at all times. So a lot of people some people who are very scientific, they reject astrology because they don't understand the science of it. And other people who are very spiritual and understand that we create our own experiences, they reject astrology because astrology seems to imply that we don't.
That it's all pre-planned.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens that's even more important is that when we are not in our physical body, we are much more aware of our oneness with all of existence. And we have all these different levels of consciousness. And when we're in the physical body, it's harder to have access to those different levels of consciousness. Whereas when we're outside of the physical body, we're not born yet, we've just left for a lifetime, we're in more contact with that greater scheme of consciousness that is our, it's our true inheritance. So at the point of coming into a new lifetime, we're in a state of incredible oneness, and we're about to begin a concentrated material incarnation. So when we're in a physical body, we're robbed of that higher consciousness that's automatic when we're not in a physical body. But what we do have is we have a tremendous capacity to focus and concentrate on very specific things that we don't have when we're outside of the physical. And so that's the value of being in the physical arena. So when you're right at that turning point between coming in to the physical and being in that great state of oneness, there's the truth, no matter where we are, no matter what age we are, no matter whether we're in the physical incarnation or not, there's the saying, wherever you go, there you are. And people take that to mean, well, we have our own emotional patterns and we're going to encounter these patterns in our environment wherever we go. We're the cause of a lot of the things that happen emotionally, which is true. But on an even bigger level, everything we do, everything we express is an expression of ourselves. So our time of birth, our moment of birth, is the most profound expression of ourselves and our true identity as a being. It's when the life force is at its maximum. It's when there's an incredible peak going on. And because all of existence is this greater unity, and we are always at one with that greater unity, that's the moment in time where it's impossible not to be born at a time that is a unique expression of who you are as an individual. So this means that your chart does not make you who you are. Who you are makes your chart what it is.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's super important to remember that, because it's really easy in life in general to start to get into this idea because of being stuck in these little physical bodies that don't see the bigger picture. It's really easy to fall into that illusion. We all will do it all the time, that these outside things are making us feel and be a certain way. They're making things happen. Mm-hmm. And when people misuse astrology, you almost always very innocently, they're doing that same thing. They're thinking these outside things, these planets, are making things happen.
That's interesting, because that's most, like, when you look at those astrology readings, they're almost reading it, to your point, in reverse then.
Yeah, exactly. So if we understand that at the time that we are born, we're coming in and we have desires that are deep soul desires. So that's one really important facet of what an astrological chart will describe. We're also coming in with certain intentions of things we're drawn to for varying reasons, because spiritual evolution is a long-term process, and we have certain riddles that we're trying to figure out and trying to resolve that can take more than one lifetime to resolve. There's a certain amount of emotional baggage attached to those riddles that we haven't resolved yet. So
is this the karmic piece?
Yeah, yes, perfect question. That is the karmic piece. So that the value of an astrological chart is, it's like a snapshot of your soul's history, your soul's intentions. That is a very large scale vision or image. Because when we get in these physical bodies and these little tiny personalities, everything gets so concentrated. We don't get the bigger picture very easily. Astrology, when it's used correctly, helps us understand what our bigger picture really is. What is our highest potential? And what's also interesting is that all the archetypes that show up in an astrological chart are infinite. And that is the nature of a true archetype, is that it can always keep expanding and expressing and growing. Very much like, what are the fractals? Do you know what a fractal is?
No.
And so it's actually, it's an art form. You can look up fractals, And it's an art form that's based on a mathematical progression. And it's really kind of infinite, because this mathematical progression creates these intricate little designs. And the deeper you go into the design, the more the design just keeps on creating itself all the time. Because it's one of those.
Is that based on all the different decisions we're making in that physical world? Like, is that what's causing kind of it to not spiral out, but make changes? Like,
yeah, in a way, life is constant expansion. We're sitting in a physical universe that's constantly expanding, and it's expanding because the life force is constantly expanding and creating. Everyone and everything is creating and expanding all the time. But when I talk about the archetype as being like a fractal, what I really mean is, if you've got something in your chart that expresses a certain basic archetype, say it might be the archetype of, the archetype of harmony and action joined together at all times. So that would, I'm just kind of pulling this out of the air, that might be, from an astrological perspective, if someone had a Venus-Mars conjunction, which, you don't need to understand what that means right now, but if somebody listening to this knows what I'm talking about, then that will help to illustrate it. So if you have a certain planetary configuration in your birth chart, all the planetary configurations are an archetype, but the way that they can express has infinite potential. So if you take harmony and action, you could express that in a negative way, that my action disrupts harmony. You could express that as tremendously harmonious action, as a very fluid form of physical self-expression. One thing that's valuable in looking at a person's chart is that you can see what the archetypes are, and you can see when some of them might have been expressing in ways that don't make a person happy and that are counterproductive. How can you use those same principles in a more positive way, and therefore expand your life and be happier and more productive? So it's as a fluid system that's expressing the essence of an individual and encouraging the individual to constantly become their greater self. So we're coming in with specific intentions, we're coming in with specific baggage or issues, karmic patterns, and we're also coming in with specific capabilities. And an astrological chart can also be looked at very much like DNA, the DNA of the soul. And so again, if we look at, old science used to look at DNA and say we're an absolute prisoner to our DNA. They're now understanding that the mind can transform our DNA, that we have so many different genetic potentials, and we're only using a fraction of them at any given time, so that if we change our mental, emotional, spiritual perspective, we can heal some of these genetic things that might have been a doom forever and another time. We can draw in other potentials. So again, the DNA is flexible and it's fluid. But at the same time, we have a certain specific DNA structure for a reason. We have something that we wanted to do with that, with that particular physical structure. We were drawn to our own specific physical body for a reason. And that's the same with the astrological chart.
Okay, so we come in with specific desires from the soul, intentions, and capabilities. That's basically what kind of summarized what you just said. Yeah.
I mean, things we want to learn and develop, but also things we want to contribute to the world. And all of that can be profoundly illuminated by looking at a chart. But we have to always remember that this is coming from within us, or it's not just only from within us, of course, primarily it is, but this is an interactive system that we're in, life itself. We're not the only creator that there is. There's all kinds of other creators out there too that we're relating to and creatively engaging with. So that's other people. That can also be the planets themselves, because again, there's a real living consciousness to the sun itself, as well as to all the planets in the solar system. So these, and life is, this has even been found that on a biological level, the vast majority of the laws of nature they're discovering are cooperative. So, it's not that the survival of the fittest is the number one law, the number one rule. You go out there and you have to eat or be eaten, and it's all doom eventually. There's so much more interactive creativity going on all levels of existence. And that is the same with how we are having interactive creativity with the planet itself. This is what we're meant to be doing as humans. We're not meant to be destroying this place. We're going to be learning slowly to stop doing that and to start to work in an interactive and creative way that benefits us and that benefits nature. And we can also work in an interactive way with the consciousness of these planets, so that they are there as the planets are operating in life. They are interacting with us, and they are also expressing a piece of ourselves anyway, or encouraging parts of our development. So as the planets move through the sky, they're automatically relating with everybody's imprint, the snapshot, the birth chart that we have at the moment of birth, and drawing forth the potentials. There's a dialogue that goes on. And for most people, the dialogue is subconscious. So they're not as capable of really working with it. But again, to use astrology in the most constructive way, you want to have a conscious, constructive dialogue with the principles, the divine principles that each of those planets are expressing. Now, these are the planets as they're in transit, but that's what it's called when the planets appear to be moving through our chart or influencing our chart. You're talking about transits. That's the astrological term for it.
Okay.
So when we're looking at reading the chart, and again, this is something that's, it's for thousands of years, astrologers have studied all of this to be able to understand the way that it's working. All the universal language in, everywhere in the human world, but the universal language in the universe itself is symbolism. So that all symbols essentially mean the same thing, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. So astrology is understood by learning how to think and work with symbolism. And it's interesting too, because they found that astrologers tend to have very strong right and left brain balance, because astrology is a science and it's an art. That's the old traditional teaching, that it's both. And you're using mathematics, although luckily the computers do that for us now. It took them decades to get it right, because it's very confusing mathematics, because it's challenging to fine tune it. So luckily we don't have to do that anymore. Astrologers, the computers do it for us. But nonetheless, there's still a lot of mathematical and logical principles and structure to astrology. But the symbolism is all from more right brain, intuitive, creative. So what happens to learn to be a good astrologer, you have to be able to feel the essence of the basic principles of astrology. And when you can feel them like they're living beings, then you can learn, you can interpret from that felt understanding of these principles. And there really aren't that many principles either. Mm-hmm. They can combine in pretty much infinite combinations. And so you get, infinite individuality from them, but they're pretty simple once you get the feel for all of them.
Is part of the idea too to bring your subconscious, like your I guess your soul, more to the forefront, to consciousness? Is that part of this too? Like, can we talk about the fact that we're drawing forth potential, but are we we're trying to tap into that subconscious piece too while we're doing all this?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And that's an excellent question. Again. Okay. Yeah, but it's true. I mean, certainly when I mentioned that astrologers have a good right brain, left brain balance, probably a lot of them don't start out that way. Mm-hmm. But through, some might come into it. There's a lot of astrologers who actually became astrologers because they were scientists and they were really irked by this pseudoscience and they wanted to prove it didn't work. So they really start to learn about it and work on trying to prove it didn't work, and they end up proving to themselves that it does work.
Isn't it almost like exercising? Like you're kind of growing kind of that, I don't know whatever you want to call it, that essence, that intuition that's already a part of you. You're just exercising it and using it a little bit more in order to be able to really drive from it. I don't know if that makes sense. But.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Definitely. Yeah, and then the more intuitive or creative person will get the structured thinking, and using astrology properly, you get more grounded. So that's where a person who would be more right brain oriented coming into the study of astrology would get a balance between the right and left brain.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's good that way. Now, I want to say one more thing before I get into what the basics are as a group. There's, in terms of that sense of oneness, that everything is a greater whole, that is one being. Really, that's what God is that one being that we all are. On a sort of smaller level, the solar system itself is one being. Even the sun itself has a more subtle field of energy that actually includes all the planets, even on a physical level. So you can look at it in terms of the solar system is one system, and all the planets are a facet of the sun. And when you look at a birth chart, any question you have about anything you find in the chart, you can always find an answer in the sun. And we will get back to that when we start studying things in more depth. So what are the basic components of a chart? Basic components of a chart are the signs, the planets, the houses, and the aspects. Those are the 4 basic components of a chart.
What was the last one? The houses
and the aspects?
Aspects?
Aspects are relationships between planets.
Okay.
So that's actually number 4, but I'll start explaining it now since you asked about it. Planets that are found in pretty much the same part of the sky are in aspect with each other, and that's called a conjunction, because they're obvious. You look at them, they're close together. They have to be having some kind of relationship. There has to be a shared energy going on because they're so close together. Mm-hmm. So aspects are always a certain mathematical relationship between 2 planets. And so if you talk about, they talk about the music of the spheres, and they actually have recorded the sounds that come from the planets. There really is a sound, the music of the spheres. On a more subtle level, any kind of mathematical effect or musical effect has to do with different relationships, whether it's relationships between different sounds in music that create harmony or discord. You also have relationships based on there being a certain mathematical relationship between the planets. So when you put 2 planets together, that's the first aspect. But if you find 2 planets exactly opposite to each other, like on a full moon, the sun will always rise when the moon is setting. The moon will always rise when the sun is setting. They are exactly opposite to each other. That's another mathematical relationship, which is an aspect. Mm. And so aspects use geometry. So if you look at, as the planets appear to move around the Earth, it's really the Earth rotating. But astrology is a science of relationships. So we're going by the subjective experience of what's going on, even though we know the sun's not really rising, the Earth is rolling. Still, the sunrise has a physiological effect on us, and it has an emotional effect on us. And if a person is born at sunrise, that's going to really be meaningful in terms of that person's entire life, because that's their expression of self. They are a sunrise being. That's one way to put it. So when we have these different aspects, they're going to create a relationship between the different planets. So it's very much like mixing colors with painting. Mm. If you mix yellow and red, you're going to get orange. So if you have a certain mathematical relationship between one planet that's representing a certain archetypal energy and another planet that represents a different archetypal energy, you're going to see certain results. So I do think of learning the astrological basics is very much like learning your colors if you're going to be an artist. because it's another thing that's happening a lot with astrology. There's a lot of paint by numbers astrology, which is, okay, I've got Venus in Aries and it's in my 6th house, and I'm going to just go look up what does that mean. And then there's a computerized cookie cutter meaning of what that means in that sign or what that means in that house. And you don't integrate it to the rest of the chart, and you don't really get to know what the essence of that sign is, what the essence of that planet is, and what the essence of that house is. So you're not really going to see the living reality of it and all the infinite potentials. You only get that when you know your colors, when you know what happens if you mix your colors on a metaphoric level. So the aspects are mathematical relationships the planets have with each other. And they can have a specific relationship that's in your chart. It's always going to be there. And then there are also relationships as the planets are moving by transit that will stimulate things at different times. So that's number 4 of the basic principles. I guess I'll consider the planets themselves to be number 1. It's because they're the sort of living energies. And this is another metaphor I use that actually Stephen Forrest, who I like his work a lot, also used that same metaphor, but I thought of it and he thought of it separately. And he's written about it. He talks about how the planets are the actors and the signs are the costumes. The houses are the stages. So it's the setting in which the actors are acting with their costumes on. And to me, the aspects are maybe the lines that they're being given, but there's always improvisation. So we figure out how to work differently sometimes with all of those things. So once you get an idea of what each sign is, as far as the essence, the type of expression that sign generally has, and who a certain planet is almost as an actor or as an individual, you're going to see how that actor is likely to react when it puts on a certain costume. And then you have the big burly hairy creature wearing a ballerina costume who walks on to the set of let's say it's a stock market. Now this would be a very bizarre looking chart, but there's all kinds of different ways we can mix and match all of that.
No, that's a really good metaphor. So the signs are the essence, like, of who you are, but the planets are like, how would you describe a little bit further the actors, like them as actors? Like, how does that, just as the houses, but the actors, I'm still like, the difference between the planets and the signs. Is there any way you could differentiate it further for me?
Well, the planets are active essences. So the sun is my being, my soul expression. Mercury is my mind. Venus is what I want to be, how I want to love. These are all forms of a drive. That would be one really good way to describe a planet. It's a specific drive, but it's something that's trying to take action. And it's going to try to take action in an arena, which is a house, and it's going to be affected by or taking on the tone of the sign, expressing itself through the sign.
Okay.
Now the signs are how much time we got? The signs are rather interesting too, because this brings another thing that's maybe a little bit more complicated, but there's 2 ways of looking at the signs, and one is the way that Western astrology approaches the signs, and the other way is the way that Eastern or Hindu or Jyotish astrology, those are all 3 different terms for the same thing, approaches the signs. And the way that Western astrology actually views the signs of the zodiac is that they are not connected to the stars or the constellations we see with our physical eyes.
Okay.
What they are instead is they are what you could imagine as an invisible field around the outside of the earth that's connected to the times of day and the seasons, and how we are automatically responsive to certain seasonal realities. In the middle of winter, you're inclined to feel a little chilly. You're going to warm up. You're going to tense. In the summer, you're going to feel warm and expansive, but maybe you're going to feel a little too hot. Those are somewhat metaphoric, but the signs take on a quality of those particular seasons. And it's kind of interesting because the Hindu astrology has 2 zodiacs. They have the 12 signs that you find in the Western astrology, and they also have the 27, or occasionally 28, but basically 27 nakshatras, which are actually a lunar zodiac. And my understanding from what I've looked at with that is that that's the older system, and that is a system that connects to the constellations. So at the time that the Western astrology came up with the signs of the zodiac, it was always based on this kind of seasonal field that affects us at all times. And in order to map out what's going on in that field and where the planets are, the constellations were invented. So the constellations were imposed on the stars that you see in the sky. This is why, I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you look at a picture of the constellations, here's all these stars, star map, and then there's little drawings to make up the sign. You wonder, how did they ever imagine that this was a lion or that was a ram? How did they get these particular images out of those stars? It's a bit of a stretch. You look at those stars, they don't immediately make you think of those signs.
That's right.
And the reason is that those signs were being used as a backdrop. They were not what conjured the image of that particular constellation, the picture that people used to metaphorically express the influence of that sign.
So astrology really is universal, though, wouldn't you say? I know that, when people are listening to these recordings, there could be questions around kind of, the term of God or universe or whatever you subscribe to. But really the way you talk about it really is universal to any kind of spirituality, religion.
Definitely.
You say? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and astrology also teaches us to be completely non-judgmental, because it gives you, and again, when it's used correctly, you see the infinite possibilities of each individual soul, and you understand the burdens that each soul carries. And it's not possible to judge when you see it that way. You can't judge on the basis of anything. So there's no reason to be getting involved in all kinds of different, conflicts between different religions and philosophies, or judging or hating people, because each person's path is so unique. So I'm trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to include in this. Talked about, I want to mention the houses to a degree. Now the houses are interesting because they're another, and everybody knows this that looks at astrology, that the houses are definitely not something you see outside of you in any way. We can see the planets in the sky, and everybody agrees where they are in the sky because you can see them right there. Where the signs of the zodiac, there's sort of the conflict between, is it those stars out there, which Western astrology still uses influences of those stars in certain ways as well. But the signs of the zodiac actually are separate from the stars. But the houses are always understood to be something that you don't see out in the sky. They are designed by taking an imaginary look at the sky around us at any given moment and cutting it up in little pieces. So at any given moment, there are 6 houses that are visible to us up above us. And then there are the other 6 houses that are invisible to us. They'd be on the other side of the earth. And it's interesting because the departments of life that they rule are always something that we're usually pretty actively involved in at the time of day that the sun is in that part of the sky. So it really has to do, the houses really have to do with the rhythm of our daily activities, and how the subconscious kind of marks that time of day always as having a certain feeling or a certain meaning.
Is that supposed to be a reminder for something, or?
It's like a reminder, yeah. It's more an instinctive kind of automatic feeling. For example, the 7th house is the house of our partnership and intimate relationships, and the sun is always in the 7th house in the 2 hours before sunset. So if we've had our busy day out working in the fields, or in our little in our little cubicle, or wherever we're doing, by the time it's getting to the end of the workday, what do you want to do really instinctively? You kind of want to go home and cuddle up with someone you love. That's just a natural need. The sun's going down, sunset's so pretty, it's so romantic. And and the 7th house also, interestingly enough, rules enemies. And so also by the end of the day, if you've been irked by somebody, it's really bothering you by then. If you haven't been able to let it go, by the end of the workday, you're really going to be going, I really can't stand that guy. I wish he'd get fired. So that's just one example of how these different departments of life are symbolized by that particular time of day. And that's how the houses seem to work within us. Because again, there's symbolism. Symbolism, I think in some ways you could say it forms on the basis of repeated patterns or habitual responses. After a while, that forms a deeper image in the subconscious. The subconscious is very retentive. It absorbs everything. But if it starts absorbing same thing over and over and over again, that will form a specific image. That will form a subjective response that's sort of automatic. So I think that probably covers the basic philosophy. I don't know if you might have any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to, I love all the different pieces that you walked through. And so basically, we really come in and, I like how you said we are who, what makes our charts, basically. Like the foundation in our soul is what makes our charts, not the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, maybe some questions you've had around manifestation or free will? Because I know there's like a heavy debate around that. And is that something you ever talk about at all?
Sometimes. Can you think of any specific?
So you come in and you have all your components, the planets, the signs, the houses. You as a soul have decided kind of, over lifetimes, there's karmic pieces and things that you're coming into this lifetime with. But my impression of this is that you're given multiple choices in order to kind of learn what you need to learn in a physical body, right?
Yeah.
So that is kind of your free will piece. But then there's your kind of divinity piece, which is there are ingrained lessons and people that will come into your life regardless. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I do see certain things, and this is even when I've just worked on a straight intuitive basis. You see certain things that people really do decide before birth, and these are structures that are really going to be there no matter what. It's and some of those can be changed too, but it's challenging. So if you compare it to the genetic code again, we're going to choose to be born into a certain race. We're going to choose to be born as a certain gender. Now, sometimes people can change their gender.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. And it's the same thing if you're wanting to change some of these really structured things. And and when it comes to the chart, there's very specific reasons why we choose those poles. There's certain, if you're building a house, there are certain parts of the structure of the building that need to be there so the ceiling doesn't collapse. And then there are lots of other things that you can create around that basic structure. And there's ways to look at the chart and see what kinds of things represent the bigger, larger structural choice, which is generally the smaller component of everything, as far as the sort of what you'd call almost immutable choice. And, you know, there, when you come in, it's not as though you sit back and you're totally in your logical mind and you've got your laundry list of, I got to fix this karma and I got to do that and I got to deal with that. It tends to be a little bit more instinctive than that, because we're viewing it from the vantage point of being in a physical body with the certain type of brain we have when we're in a physical body. When you're not a physical body, everything is much more diffuse and united. And because it's more diffuse, we can't get as much done when we're not physical as far as our spiritual evolution goes. It's harder here, but it's more focused. And this is where it's really happening. And this is why a lot of souls will go through getting and not enjoying it when they're here, and they get attracted to a spiritual philosophy that's about transcending, and when I leave my physical body, I'll be free and I'll be blissful and it'll be wonderful. They want to get away from it, and then they get to the other side and very quickly they want back in. And it's because you really can't really experience things and really move forward and really truly make real progress on those other levels. But on those other levels, when we're coming in, we're being driven by multiple levels of our being. So certainly we have that higher aspect of ourselves that does have a wisdom and a certain level of control that will choose bigger picture things that are always of value to us. And then we'll have the other pieces that are coming in and that are being drawn in a little more compulsively. So when people talk about we choose our parents, it's absolutely true, because we choose all of our experiences on some level. A lot of them look at the parents they had and they say, my God, that can't be right. Or what was I thinking? And sometimes what's happening is that we have these older, more pain-filled pieces that didn't get to fully purify in between lifetimes. And those pieces were pulling us in towards things that are more turbulent. But sometimes we choose a difficult situation because we're going to get real value from surmounting that difficulty. So each situation is pretty unique. But again, there's lots of keys in the chart to really help to open up that riddle and really illuminate what was the reason why these things were chosen. Because if you can get at the reason why certain things were chosen, whether it's our bigger destiny or our smaller destiny, what's going on right now, many times you can fulfill that original goal without having to go through the same kind of unpleasant situation. You can't sometimes just get rid of the unpleasant situation without fulfilling the purpose that we wanted to achieve in the first place. If we can aim towards that purpose, then you sort of immediately deflate the other difficult scenario.
So at a later time, are we going to be talking about the various three? I think there's 3 soul stages. Is that's not a part of this foundational piece yet?
No, not yet. We're going to do a lot of we'll be talking about a lot of that.
Okay, great.
Yeah. The one thing that does to a degree relate to this is that the 3 stages are the 3 stages of the sun, and we stay in one sign for a long series of lifetimes, not necessarily concurrent. But we go through 3 stages of development with each sign, and each stage takes several lifetimes to pass through. So it's a very, very big picture development process. What's significant is that in each of these 3 stages, a different part of our psyche tends to dominate us while we're in our lifetime. And in first stage, it is the conscious mind that is dominant. And in second stage, the subconscious mind and the subconscious patterns and compulsions dominate. And in third stage, the higher self, or the spirit and the spiritual level of awareness, is what's dominant.
And is that the ultimate goal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a much happier place to be, too. Although first stage can be, and depending on the sign, a lot of signs in first stage can be pretty happy, too.
That's great.
And people who are really suffering and struggling and trying to find answers and not knowing if they'll ever be happy again, or if they don't even know what happiness feels like, but they're struggling and trying to find a way out. Those are the people that are coming out of second stage and are headed towards third stage. But it unfortunately takes a while to make that transition. But on the other side of the coin, it's inevitable the person will succeed.
So does each soul develop through each sign entirely, or they kind of maybe do 2 or 3 over lifetimes? Do they go through all the signs, or?
Well, individuality is the law of life. So people will make their own larger scale, what would I call it? Almost like I'm thinking a collage, of picking all these different components and putting it all together. Mm-hmm. So I think most people will go through all the signs. Most people probably go through all the signs more than once, but some people may come in and just do a couple of signs. It is really quite individual.
So someone might be just drawn to a sign and kind of stay with that one.
Yeah. That's actually one of the games some of my friends and I like to play. What sign do you want to be next?
Yeah. They're all so unique.
Yeah. So I've decided it's Sagittarius is what I want to be next.
Really?
And when I look at, you can also look at your rising sign because it's there to help to correct your imbalances. And I'm looking at the imbalances I've expressed in this lifetime, and I'm pretty sure I know what my next rising sign is going to be. I've done reasonably well with this one. Now I'm going to have a different one next time.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I think that's all my questions.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I think we'll probably close it there then.
Yeah.